Hey guys, tonight we step into the damp, shadowy world of medieval survival where forests are vast, wild beasts are many, and dinner doesn't come from a cupboard but from the edge of a spear or the fall of a snare. You open your eyes to the chill of early morning. There's no alarm clock, just the distant hoot of an owl wrapping up its night shift, and the steady drip of condensation off your straw roof. You stretch under your rough wool blanket and realize something very important. You're already behind schedule. The fire's gone out. Again, you wrap your threadbare cloak tighter, your breath forming little puffs in the frigid air, and make your way outside. The frost crunches beneath your leather-wrapped feet. Your village is small wooden huts, leaning like tired men, smoke curling lazily from a few chimneys. You sniff the air, but there's no scent of stew or fresh bread. Just mud, smoke, and desperation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You glance at the trees just beyond the fields. That's where your food is. No supermarkets, no late-night kebabs, just nature, red in tooth and claw. And speaking of claws, you probably won't survive this. You sling a rough sack over your shoulder, inside which rests a few lengths of rope, a small knife, and some dry crumbs of yesterday's bread. That's not lunch. That's bait, the elders warned you. Beasts don't wait for permission. Wild boars, deer wolves, any of them, could be out there. Hunting in the Middle Ages wasn't a hobby. It was a dice roll with your life. If you're a peasant, which you very much are, then you're either hunting for your next meal or defending your last one. You start by heading toward the forest's edge. You're not alone. A few other villagers, equally underfed and equally armed with laughably inadequate tools, fan out beside you. One man carries a sharpened stick, another a battered sling. There's a shared silence among the group, part reverence for the land, part grim awareness of how little room there is for error. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants hunted often, or if it was more of a last resort. Records are sketchy since most peasants didn't exactly keep diaries, but the evidence suggests that when times got tough, and they often did, everyone grabbed whatever they could and headed for the trees. You step past the last row of scrub and into the forest proper. The light changes here. It's dimmer, cooler. The air smells of damp leaves and mossy bark. Every sound, every snapped twig or rustled fern makes your heart twitch a little. You scan for tracks, muddy impressions left behind by cloven hooves. It could be a deer or a boar, or if your luck is really rotten, a wolf. You don't want a wolf, trust me. A middle-aged woman next to you, Gerda, crouches and points at a set of deep prints. Boar, she whispers. Her tone is both hopeful and grim. Boars are a paradox, terrifying and delicious. They can feed a village or flatten one. You kneel beside her and feel the print. It's still warm. The beast is close. Now begins the quiet part, the waiting. You press yourself against a tree, frozen in place, every sense tuned to the forest. You listen. Birds chirp overhead. A squirrel chatters. Then silence, suddenly a crashing sound to your left. Something big is moving through the underbrush. Everyone tenses. The man with the sling raises his arm, but drops it just as quickly. Whatever's coming is too big. And then it bursts into view. A boar, tusks shining, eyes wild. You freeze. It sees you. There's a very good chance this thing could kill you. Wild boars in medieval Europe weren't cartoon pigs. They were tanks with legs and a foul attitude. Some manuscripts even describe them as demonic beasts, sent by the gods to punish the greedy. You don't know about that, but you do know it's charging straight at you. Gerda hurls a stone. It bounces harmlessly off a tree. Someone else yells and throws a stick. The boar veers left and disappears back into the thicket. You're alive, barely, and still hungry. This is the reality of medieval life. Danger without reward. Effort without result. You slump against the tree and feel the ache settle into your bones. Hunting wasn't just about catching food. It was about maybe catching food. and risking everything in the attempt. But don't worry, you've still got most of the day ahead. Maybe the next hunt will be different. Maybe the next one won't involve running for your life. Maybe just as you start to push yourself up, a distant horn sounds. That's no peasant signal. That's the call of the nobility. Someone important is about to enter the woods. You glance toward the sound, and sure enough, through the mist, you see them. Finely dressed hunters on horseback, their dogs bounding. Ahead, falcons perched on thick gloves. They don't see your. If they do, they don't care. You're not part of their world. But you'll be part of their hunt soon enough, willingly or not. And so, with your pulse still elevated and your stomach grumbling louder than your thoughts, you step out of the way, bow slightly, and prepare to play your role in their elaborate forest ballet. Because in the Middle Ages, hunting wasn't just survival, it was also theater. And you're about to be backstage crew. You rub your palms together as the noble procession clatters past, leaving a trail of churned-up leaves and hoofprints through the undergrowth. Their voices are loud, easy, full of laughter. Must be nice, you think, to hunt when you're already full. You turn your attention back to your original goal, tracking a boar that almost flattened you, but that's easier said than done. The forest doesn't leave clear instructions. No maps, no GPS, just 1,000 subtle signs that might mean something if you know what to look for. Luckily, Gerda does. She crouches low and points to a cluster of twigs near the base of a bush. See that? She whispers. You nod, even though you see nothing. She taps gently to twigs, snapped clean, the leaves, above, slightly parted. Something passed through here recently, something big and careless, probably your boar. You kneel beside her, suddenly noticing the faint trail, a slight depression in the grass, a few overturned stones, even a patch of rubbed bark where something brushed past too fast. These aren't just random marks. They're clues. This is the forest's version of a handwritten note. Medieval hunters, especially peasants, didn't have bloodhounds or fancy tracking charts. What they had was attention, the kind that comes from hunger, from experience, from desperation. They could read a footprint like you read a text message, complete with tone, urgency, and probably a typo or two. A crushed blade of grass might tell you which direction a deer was moving. A broken mushroom could mean it stopped to sniff something, even droppings. Poop became essential tools in your mental hunting kit, and you get to smell plenty of that today. Historians still argue whether tracking was formally taught or just picked up over time, like how you learn to tell when someone's lying by the way they blink. But there's evidence that some families passed down tracking knowledge the same way they handed down cooking secrets or bedtime. Ghost stories Gerda teaches you now, not through words, but by example. She glides through the forest without making a sound. She notices everything. You try to do the same, but your boots are too loud, and your knees crack at the worst possible times. Still, you start to notice patterns, the way branches are bent in one direction, or how a line of scuffed leaves leads toward a dry stream bed. That stream could be useful. Animals need water, after all, and anything thirsty enough will leave evidence of its drink. You approach the bank, stepping carefully to avoid slipping on the algaslick stones. Gerda kneels again, this time beside a patch of fresh mud. They're a print, deep, triangular, with a clear indentation from a hoof. More than one, actually. A whole group. She taps her chin. Could be deer. Could be pigs. Could be both. You squint. Is that good? She shrugs. Better than nothing. Tracking is a quiet art, but it's not peaceful. Every step might take you closer to food or danger. You pause at the water's edge and feel the breeze shift. It carries the sharp, musky smell of something very much alive, and very close. That's the thing about tracking. Sometimes, the thing you're tracking is also tracking you. You remember stories from the older kids. Tales of hunters who followed animal prints into deep woods and were never seen again. Maybe wolves, maybe something worse. Something that left no prints at all. Still, you press on, deeper into the green. Your body moves on autopilot, eyes scanning the ground, ears twitching at every crack of a branch. A bird flutters overhead, and you flinch. Your nerves are fried, and it's not even noon yet. Eventually, the trail splits, hoofprints in one direction, pawprints in the other. Gerda raises an eyebrow. You know what's coming. Split up, she says. She gestures for you to follow. The pause. You nod reluctantly. Of course you get the pause. You tread cautiously. The ground here is moist and covered in thick ferns. Every step feels too loud, every breath too fast. The prints are fresh, still sharp at the edges. Not dog. Too. Large wolf. Maybe. You swallow hard and try to remember the advice. Don't run. Don't turn your back. Make yourself look big, which is hilarious. Considering you barely clear 5 feet, and your only weapon is a stick. You follow the trail until you find a clearing. The prints stop here. There's a patch of flattened grass, and wait, a tuft of fur stuck on a low branch, coarse gray. You gently pull it free, and hold it up to the light. Yep, wolf. Then you hear it, a low growl, not far. To close, you freeze. Slowly, painfully slowly, you turn your head. Just beyond the trees, a pair of yellow eyes glint in the underbrush. You don't scream, you don't run, but your knees suddenly forget how to be knees. You step back, careful not to trip. The growl fades. Whatever it was, it lets you go. This time, you back away, trembling. Eventually, the trees thin out, and you hear voices, Gerda and the others, laughing. Maybe even roasting something over a small fire. They didn't find a boar, but they did trap a hare. Barely enough to share, but enough for a meal. They welcome you back with teasing and a bit of dried meat. You chew in silence, grateful to still have a face to chew with. The sun is high now. The forest hums with life. And though your stomach is fuller than it was this morning, your mind buzzes with questions. Who taught the first person to track? How did they know what to look for? Were they just hungry enough to notice? You lie back in the grass, eyes tracing the flight of a bird overhead. There's no one around for miles with a map or a compass. Just you, a few friends, and the quiet rhythm of a world that never quite wanted you here in the first place. And somehow, you've made it another day. Your stomach growls again before the hare even finishes sizzling. It's not exactly a feast, but it smells like heaven, scorched fur. A hint of thyme someone found growing near a stream, and the promise of warm protein. You get your bite the size of a walnut and wash it down with lukewarm creek water. You're not full, not even close. But you're alive, and that's apparently the going rate for satisfaction around here. Still, you're not done. The fire's dying down, and Gerda's already repacking her pouch. Boars still out there, she mutters. And just like that, the moment of warmth is over. This time, you're not going into the woods. You're going through the bog. The tracks were spotted there, earlier churned up mud, snout prints. Even a tree trunk with bark ripped off like someone peeled it with a crowbar. Wild boars don't wait around to be cornered. If they're still near, they're likely tired, thirsty, and dangerously cranky. Perfect. You trudge through mud that pulls at your ankles like it wants to steal your shoes. Every step makes an embarrassing squelch. Your stick is more like a glorified broom handle now, but you hold it tightly. Everyone spreads out in a rough half circle, eyes scanning the tangled underbrush. Suddenly, a loud snap. Everyone stops. Then movement, a flash of dark brown muscle in the brambles. The boar dot, and now you're in it. Gerda hisses to flank left. You nod and move carefully, trying not to slip on the wet moss. The boar snorts, and you hear it rooting through the undergrowth. Your heart pounds so hard your ears ring. Here's something to keep in mind. Wild boars in medieval Europe weren't just hard to kill. They were infamous for killing people. They were so dangerous that nobles used them as status symbols. If you could bring down a boar, you were worth something. If it brought you down, well, at least your corpse would impress the right people. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants regularly hunted such beasts, or only helped drive them toward the nobles for the final blow. But today, no nobles are nearby, just you, a few scrappy villagers, and the realization that you're badly outclassed. The boar bursts from the bushes, like a cannonball with hooves. Chaos, someone yells. Someone else throws a spear that misses by an embarrassing margin and sticks into a tree with a dramatic thunk. You barely dodge as the beast charges past, mud flying from its hooves. Its tusks, gleam serrated, yellowed, and very much capable of turning your torso into decorative ribbons. The plan, if there even was one, is unraveling fast. You take off running, not exactly chasing the boar, but not letting it get away either. It crashes through a thicket, and you follow, heart in your throat. You catch sight of it, again snorting, panting, slowing down. It's hurt, not badly, but enough to make it reckless. Or desperate. That's good. Desperate things make mistakes. You should know. You and Gerta exchange a glance. She nods and motions with her hand. Circle around. Cut it off. You obey. Moving silently now, you loop through a stand of gnarled trees. Every step is slow, deliberate. You're so focused, so intensely aware, that you swear you can hear the boar's breathing. There. It's cornered in a shallow ravine. Snout low, tusks flashing, eyes furious. You freeze. This is the moment. Every nerve tells you to run. But, instead, you lift your stick and step forward. Not to fight debate. Because here's a fringe fact. Not many people. No. Some medieval peasants didn't fight boars head-on. They distracted them while someone else, usually braver or stupider, went for the kill. You're playing distraction. The boar sees you, and it charges. Time slows. You throw the stick knot at it, but past it, then dive to the side, praying your reflexes aren't laughable. They're not. You hit the mud hard, roll, and pop up just in time to hear Gerta's yell and the wet, meaty thud of her spear hitting flesh. The boar screams a horrible high-pitched sound and crashes to its knees. It thrashes, grunts, then finally collapses. You both stand there, breathing hard. Covered in mud, bruised, terrified, victorious. Gerta pokes the carcass with the end of her spear to make sure it's really dead. It is, and it's huge. Everyone gathers around. Jaws slack. No one says much. What's there to say? You did it. You actually brought down a wild boar. With a stick, a spear, and a lot of dumb luck. And now comes the less glamorous part. Butchering it takes hours. The hide is thick. The tusks are pulled carefully and set aside. The meat is divided into shares, haunches, belly, liver, kidneys. Nothing goes to waste. Even the blood is collected to thicken stews later. You're offered a slice of liver on a stick, seared hastily over coals. You accept it gratefully, even if it tastes like metal and regret. The sun's starting to dip. The air smells like smoke, sweat, and sizzling fat. One of the older men tells a story about a hunt where a boar turned around and skewered. A night clean through armor and all. Everyone laughs. Nervously you sit down, exhausted. Every muscle aches. Your palms are blistered. Your mouth is dry. But your belly is no longer hollow. Not full, but no longer empty. There's a difference. You glance at the boar's massive tusks gleaming in the firelight. This creature could have killed you. Should have, maybe. But instead, it's feeding you. You wonder what stories will be told about this hunt. And then you remember tomorrow, because food runs out quickly. And the forest is still full of creatures that don't want to be dinner. For now, you lean back, watching embers float into the darkening sky. You're dirty, tired, and probably carrying fleas. But you're alive, and that counts for something. The sun barely creeps over the horizon when someone nudges your shoulder. Up, they whisper. The nobles are coming. You groan. Of course they are. Yesterday's glorious, exhausting boar hunt still sits heavily in your muscles, every limb aching with effort. But it doesn't matter. You're not about to refuse a noble's invitation to join their grand hunt. Or rather, you're not allowed to refuse. Invitations from lords are less about choice and more about appearances. And your appearance is required. You throw on your damp tunic, grab what remains of your boots, and shuffle toward the gathering point just outside the village. There, a small army waits, not of soldiers, but of noblemen in silks and leather, their horses groomed to near godhood, their dogs straining at the leash, barking excitedly. A trumpet blows, completely unnecessary, but very on brand. One of the nobles flashes a smile at you, like you're part of the entertainment. Which, to be fair, you probably are. Welcome to the aristocratic version of survival. Hunting in the Middle Ages wasn't just for food, was a performance. For nobles, it was about prestige, power, and proving to their equally overdressed peers that they were strong, noble, and connected to the land. Even if most of them hadn't set foot in mud in weeks, historians still argue whether these noble hunts were actually efficient ways of getting meat, or just glorified parades with occasional bloodshed. Either way, they were a big deal. Organized days in advance, with beaters, that's you and your fellow peasants flushing out game, while the nobles rode in at the last second to deliver the fatal blow, and then take all the credit. You're handed a stick knot for protection, but for waving and clapping at bushes, to scare animals into the noble's path. A knight nearby adjusts his falconer's glove, his bird blinking at you with that weird look only birds can give. The hounds sniff at your legs, quickly deciding you're not worth their time. Then it begins. A horn sounds. The dogs surge forward, nearly dragging the handlers off their feet. Horses prance. Nobles shout. And you trudge into the forest with a handful of others, clapping branches and muttering under your breath about class systems and sore feet. You spot a deer knot, far, alert, ears twitching. You raise your stick and give a shout. The deer bolts. Horns blare. Horses charge. The nobleman on the lead horse draws his bow, looses an arrow, and misses by a humiliating margin. The deer disappears. No one says anything. You exchange a glance with Goethe, who's also here, red-eyed and unimpressed. Good thing they brought 6 more horns, she mutters, brushing a leaf off her shoulder. The day wears on. You help drive rabbits into nets, though you're not allowed to keep any. You chase a fox that somehow outsmarts 3 dogs, a knight, and 2 crossbowmen. You even watch a noble tumble off his horse and land in a puddle, prompting suppressed snorts from your fellow peasants. His squire rushes to help him, muttering apologies, as if the ground personally insulted him. But then, something shifts. Late afternoon, and one of the dogs picks up a scent. Not a fox, not a rabbit. Something bigger. The barking becomes frantic. The nobles grow serious. It's a stag. The ultimate prize. You're repositioned, quickly told to create noise from the west, while the nobles form a crescent on the east. You beat the bushes with your stick and yell, not because you think it'll work, but because someone in fine boots told you to. It works. The stag emerges, majestic, all muscle and antlers. It's beautiful, and it's terrified. 3 arrows. Fly one strikes the beast in the flank. It stumbles, recovers, and charges right through the noble's line. Chaos erupts. A knight's horse rears. Another noble yells for his sword, like someone stole it. In the end, it's one of the dogs that brings it down. The kill is messy and loud and not at all elegant, and yet the noblemen cheer, already proclaiming victory. One of them hoists the antlers triumphantly, while you and the others are instructed to begin processing the meat. You know what that means. You skin, you gut, you haul, they pose, and, of course, they keep the choicest cuts. The heart is presented to the hunt leader like some sacred offering. The liver is sliced ceremoniously. The rest is loaded onto a cart destined for their haul. You get a half-roasted tail and a pat on the back. Well done, a noble says. You peasants are quite the outdoorsmen. He chuckles and rides off before you can say something sarcastic. Still, there's a strange sense of satisfaction. You played your role. And in a way, so did they. Here's a quirky fact. Noble hunts often doubled as social mixers. Think speed dating, but with more blood and fewer questions about hobbies. Daughters were married off, alliances discussed, enemies sized up all over the body of some unfortunate animal. Love, blood, and venison stew. You walk back toward the village, the noble party still celebrating behind you. The sun's dipping low, casting gold across the trees. Your hands are sticky with animal fat, your boots filled with swamp water. But your head is full of stories, not just about what you saw, but what it meant. Because in the medieval world, hunting wasn't just a way to fill your belly. It was a ritual, a symbol, a ladder dot. And sometimes, if you played your part well enough, you got to climb one rung, even if you were still at the bottom. Your reward for a full day of serving the noble hunt isn't much, just a blistered heel, some dried blood under your nails, and a gristly chunk of tail meat you're not entirely sure how to cook. You trudge home in silence, only the sound of your squelching boots keeping you company. But your break won't last long. As night falls, the falconer arrives. His name is Milo, and he looks like someone who hasn't smiled since the last harvest. Draped in a green cloak that smells like bird droppings and pipe smoke, he appears in the village square with a pair of leather gloves and a covered cage. "We're flying at dawn," he says without waiting for a reply. You sigh. So much for rest. At first light, you find yourself in a dewy field, standing uncomfortably still while Milo explains falconry as if you've already passed a certification exam. His bird, a massive goshawk with an unsettling stare, sits on his glove like a miniature war god. Its talons gleam. You try not to make eye contact. Falconry, you learn, is an art, a noble art. And like most noble arts, it involves complicated tools, fancy vocabulary, and the regular endangerment of people like you. This bird can spot prey from 100 feet, up dive at speeds that make arrows jealous, and isn't above maiming a peasant who smells like rabbit stew. "You'll be flushing," Milo says, handing you a wooden pole. "Beat the brush, make a fuss. She'll do the rest." You eye the bird, then the bushes. The bird eyes you. Terrific. Historians still argue whether falconry was truly effective for feeding people, or if it was mostly about prestige. Some say it was purely symbolic, another medieval flex. Others argue certain birds, especially goshawks and peregrines, were precise tools for catching hard-to-reach game like partridges, pheasants, and even small mammals. What's clear is that falcons were treated better than most humans. You begin your walk through the meadow, gently whacking tall grass and clumps of reeds. The morning fog hangs low, giving everything a silvery glow. Behind you, the falcon perches on Milo's arm, head tilting at each sound, wings twitching. Then a flutter. A partridge bursts from the underbrush, wings flapping wildly. Milo's glove flicks upward, and the bird launches like a missile. You barely see it. One moment it's beside him, the next it's a blur above you, slicing through the fog. The partridge darts left, right, panicked, but the falcon is faster. A sickening thump breaks the silence. Feathers rain gently down. You hurry toward the spot. The falcon stands atop the twitching bird, proud, predatory, puffed up with the satisfaction of a job well done. You, meanwhile, try not to gag. Milo rewards the falcon with a chunk of meat and a strange cooing noise. You get a nod. "Again," he says. By the third round, you've seen 2 more kills. 1 partridge, 1 squirrel, both dispatched cleanly. The falcon shows no hesitation. It's all instinct and precision. But the thing that sticks with you isn't the bird. It's Milo talks. He talks to the hawk like it's a person, not a pet, not a servant, an equal. He tells you falcons were once given as wedding gifts, highly prized, even more than jewelry. Royal falconers had ranks, salaries, some were granted land. Birds had names and were passed down like heirlooms. Here's a quirky fact. One medieval manuscript suggests that different classes were entitled to different birds. A king could fly a gerfalcon, a baron, a buzzard. You, if you were lucky, a kestrel. If you were really lucky, maybe a sparrowhawk with a temper problem. You spend the day with Milo, learning the names of feathers, remages, rectress, and how to tie little leather hoods that keep the birds calm. You watch as he weighs the falcon on a tiny brass scale, noting its hunger level down to a fraction of an ounce. Too full and it won't fly. Too hungry and it might just leave. Falconry is like a marriage, Milo tells you, built on trust, and likely to involve injury by evening. The kills are lined up on a wooden board. 5 partridges, a squirrel, and a weasel someone swears is actually edible. Milo looks pleased. You just feel numb. Still, it's undeniable. The bird is efficient. You didn't have to chase anything, fall into a bog, or get charged by tusks the size of gardening tools. The falcon did all the work. You just encouraged small animals to panic. That's almost relaxing. Almost as the sun dips low. You sit by a stump, watching Milo clean the falcon's talons. She rests now, he says. Earned it. He doesn't mention whether you've earned anything. You're used to that. You reach into your pouch and pull out a strip of dried boar meat from 2 days ago. It's tough, but it keeps your stomach quiet. Around you, the world settles. The fog lifts. Crickets begin their night songs. Milo stands, stretches, and nods. You're better than most, he says without making eye contact. It's the nicest thing anyone's said to you all week. You head home in the twilight, the field fading behind you. The sky is a deep violet, stars just beginning to poke through. A falcon cries far above, a haunting note that makes you shiver despite your sweat. You wonder what it would feel like to fly that high, that fast. To look down on the world and see every field, every burrow, every frightened thing trying not to be noticed. You wonder what it's like to never miss. You wake to the sound of metal clinking. Not swords or armor. This isn't one of those kinds of days. No, this is the sound of Gerda's trap box being opened. Hooks, wires, loops of sinew, and a sack of slightly moldy apples spill out onto the ground. You stretch, your shoulders still stiff from yesterday's falcon run, and realize with a sinking heart, today is all about traps. Time to learn how to wait. She says with a smile that's way too cheerful for someone who spent her life baiting snares with half-rotten onions. Unlike the thunder and flare of noble hunts, trapping is subtle, quiet, and profoundly boring until it isn't. It's a game of patience, cunning, and letting nature do most of the work while you pretend to know what you're doing. Your first stop is a tangle of underbrush near the edge of the forest, where small animals like to scurry. Gerda hands you a handful of wire and a bent branch. Rabbit snare, she says. Set it too tight, you get nothing. Too loose, you feed a rabbit and feel stupid. She squats and begins showing you, fast fingers looping and nodding in the dirt like she's been doing it since before she could speak. And maybe she has. Historians still argue whether peasants were allowed to trap freely, or if every snare was technically illegal under noble forest law. Some records suggest you could be fined or even mutilated for catching a rabbit in the wrong place. But honestly, when your stomach's growling, you don't stop to ask if the lord of the manor would approve of your screw loop. You follow Gerda's example, pressing the loop gently into the path, covering it with a dusting of leaves, and placing a slice of half-raton apple nearby. She gives a curt nod. You'll know it worked when something doesn't show up for dinner. Over the course of the morning, you set snares for rabbits, rig a rockfall trap for voles. They taste terrible. But you're not picky, and help Gerda haul a wooden cage trap for birds up into the lower limbs of an elm. The bait: old bread and a bit of honey. Apparently birds love sugar. You make a mental note to never leave cake unattended again. Here's something quirky. Medieval trappers sometimes sang songs while working, half to keep themselves entertained, half to scare off the larger animals they weren't trying to catch. One of Gerda's songs is about a weasel who steals shoes, which makes no sense at all, but gets stuck in your head anyway. The day drags on. You sit on a stump, chewing a piece of bark, not food, just a bad habit, watching the traps and waiting for movement. The sun warms your shoulders. Bugs drone lazily. Occasionally you check the snares, only to find them empty or disturbed. Once, you spot a squirrel mocking your setup before scampering away, presumably to tell its friends how incompetent you are. Patience, Gerda reminds you, isn't optional. It's survival. Afternoon hits, and finally something happens. A rustle in the brush. You crouch, silent. A rabbit hops into view, nose twitching. You watch, breath held, as it approaches the snare. It hesitates, sniffs. Inches closer. Snap. The wire catches, and the rabbit panics, thrashing in place. You rush forward, hands shaking, and quickly dispatch it the way Gerda showed you. It's not elegant, it's not pretty, but it's food. You hold it up. She nods. That'll stew nicely. You're proud, then immediately cold, because the satisfaction fades quickly. replaced by the knowledge that this is just one rabbit, one meal, not even enough for everyone back in the village, and tomorrow, you'll have to do it all again. The next few hours are better. 2 more snares catch rabbits, and a clever birdcage manages to nab a fat thrush. Not much meat, but the bones make good broth, and the feathers can be stuffed into pillows or turned into crude writing quills. Gerta even finds a half-dead vole, which she pockets like it's gold. Your hands are scraped raw. Your knees ache. You've picked 6 ticks off your leg, and one from a place no one should ever have to discuss over dinner. But you've got a bag with meat in it. Real meat. As you pack up the traps, Gerda leans against a tree and lights a small pipe. You get better, she says, exhaling smoke that smells like damp wood and regret. But you never stop waiting. That's the real lesson. You walk back together in the golden light of evening. The forest is quieter now, the wind rustling the leaves like whispers you're not quite meant to hear. You wonder about all the things out here you didn't catch. How many animals slipped past while you blinked, or sneezed, or adjusted your socks? Probably dozens. You pass the remains of the boar pit from a few days ago. The bones are mostly gone, either scavenged or taken for tools. Gerda pauses and looks down at it. Big animals make big stories, she says, but it's the little ones that keep you alive. She's right. The medieval world isn't built on glory. It's built on string, silence, and a lot of staring at bushes until something blinks. Back in the village, the fire is already going. You clean your catch. Skinning is gross, gutting is worse, and the smell will live under your fingernails for a week. But people are grateful. Someone adds carrots to the pot. Someone else brings barley. You even get a nod from the village elder. Whole nod, which is practically a standing ovation around here. You eat your stew slowly. The rabbit meat soft and smoky. It's not enough to make you full, but it's enough to keep you going. Which, in this world, is all that really matters. The morning arrives, smelling faintly of smoke and wet leather. There's a thin mist crawling over the fields, and you swear the sky hasn't changed color in 3 days. It's that endless medieval gray, where the sun shows up more out of obligation than enthusiasm. Today's task isn't glamorous. It isn't even technically hunting. It's something worse. You're going fishing now, before you get your hopes up. This is not the kind of fishing that involves sitting in a folding chair with a cold drink and a cooler full of snacks. No tackle box, no whimsical lure shaped like a cartoon frog. Just you, a dull hook tied to a strand of gut, a bit of cheese hard enough to stop arrows, and a river that may or may not have anything alive left in it. Gerda hands you a spear on the way out. Not for fish, though, you could try. And she dares you tubed up for anything else that might see your ankle as breakfast. You follow the winding dirt path through the woods, boots squelching in last night's rain, until the trees open up, and there it is, the river. It's not wide, not clean, and not exactly welcoming. The water is brown, slow-moving, and filled with suspicious floating leaves, or possibly frogs. You hope they're frogs. The river has fed your village for generations, or at least, that's what people say. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants relied heavily on fish for protein, or only turned to rivers when everything else had either escaped, flown off, or bitten back. But it's clear that freshwater fishing done, with lines, traps, or even bare hands was a crucial backup strategy. When wild game ran thin, you tie your line to a stick and drop it into the water with a plop. And then, you wait again. It's a common theme out here. Long stretches of waiting interrupted by sudden chaos. While your bait drifts lazily, you check the trap set, yesterday's simple wicker baskets placed near the shore with narrow funnels. At the mouth, if a fish swims in, it can't swim back out. That's the theory. You pull one up, nothing. The second, a single wriggling perch, roughly the size of your thumb. You hold it up proudly until it slips out of your hand and plops back. Into the water? Gerda doesn't even look up. To pass the time, you take off your boots, roll up your trousers, and wade into the shallows. You keep an eye out for leeches, of course, because you learned that lesson the hard way last summer. The mud squishes unpleasantly. Between your toes, you shuffle forward, hands open, ready to grab if something flashes past. Then something does. You lunge and, promptly fall face first into the water. Gerda laughs so hard she has to sit down. You come up sputtering, soaked, and not at all victorious. But you're smiling. It's ridiculous, sure, but there's something honest about it. Mud, failure, and all. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval communities believed certain saints could bless rivers and make the fish return after a famine. Priests would walk along the banks, casting holy water and chanting, as if fish could read Latin. Other villages just tossed stale bread in and hoped for the best. Eventually, the line tugs. You jump to your feet, yank hard, and pull up a trout. Slimy, silver, and furious about being out of its element. You cradle it like treasure. It's not massive, but it's real. Goethe raises an eyebrow. Not bad, she says, which from her is basically a love letter. You catch another two before. The light starts to fade. One's a carp. The other, ... Well, you're not sure. It has a weird face, and might be cursed. You keep it anyway. By the time you're walking back, your net has 5 fish in it. Not a feast, but enough to make a pot of soup that doesn't rely entirely on cabbage and hope. You've still got the river smell clinging to your clothes. Parts, algae, moss, and regret. But you feel good. Fishing might be slow, wet, and unpredictable, but it's less dangerous than chasing things with tusks or dodging noble arrows. And it teaches you the same core truth. You don't control nature. You negotiate with it gently, desperately. One bite at a time. Back at the village, a small fire is lit under the iron pot. Gerda guts the fish with swift, practiced movements. You watch, trying not to wince. The heads go in too. Adds flavor, she says. You don't ask what kind. The soup bubbles. You sit nearby, feet stretched toward the heat, hands wrapped around a wooden bowl. It smells better than anything has in weeks. Earthy, oily, salty in a good way. You take a bite, then another, and suddenly you're scraping the bottom. A little bone crunches between your teeth. You spit it out and keep going as night falls. The village is unusually quiet. People are too busy chewing to talk. The fire crackles. Crickets sing. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hoots. You lie back and stare at the stars, thinking about how this day, like so many, began with doubt and ended with dinner. You caught something. You brought it home. And for one night at least, that's enough. The next morning begins not with a horn, not with barking hounds, and not even with Gerda nudging you awake like usual, but with the unmistakable clang of a blacksmith's hammer. At first, you wonder if you're dreaming. After all, there's no real reason a hunter would need to visit the forge. Unless today's hunt is different. You're told as much, over a breakfast of hard bread and onion broth. Today, it's not about hares or birds, or even fish. Today, you're going after something that bites back. Wolves. Your stomach drops now. It's important to understand, this isn't just a story to scare children into staying close to the cottage. Wolves were a real threat in medieval Europe, especially during hard winters or lean years. They didn't just hunt deer, they scavenged, followed livestock, and occasionally crept dangerously close to villages. Entire herds could vanish overnight. And yes, sometimes even people. So, naturally, your task this morning is to join a hunting group heading out to handle a recent string of wolf sightings in the nearby forest fringe. Lucky you. Gerda meets you outside the forge, tightening. The leather wraps around her boots. We're not chasing, she says. We're drawing them in. She gestures toward a blood-soaked sack carried by one of the older villagers. Inside, a half-rotten goat leg. Bait. You don't ask questions. The plan is deceptively simple. Set the bait near a thicket just beyond the grazing field, hide nearby, and wait. Again, the recurring theme of the medieval world, waiting to be pounced on. Everyone has weapons today. Real ones, spears, axes, even a heavy short sword someone probably borrowed from the local militia without asking. You're given a sharpened staff with an iron tip. You try to look brave. It doesn't work. As you march out, you think about something Gerda said days ago. Big animals make big stories. Well, wolves have always made huge ones. They're in the songs, the fables, the nightmares. Some villages believed they were witches in disguise, cursed nobles, or the ghosts of criminals. Some even claimed they could speak. Historians still argue whether wolf legends stem from real events, or just a centuries-long fear of sharp teeth in the dark. You reach the bait site and begin setting up. The goat leg is tied, low to a branch, dripping steadily. It's not fresh enough to be appetizing, but it smells enough to attract attention. You crouch low behind a fallen log with 2 others, breath shallow, spear in hand, and you wait. Minutes blur into an hour. The sun climbs, flies buzz. Your back aches, your nose itches, but you dare not move. Then finalia, sound not a growl, not a howl, just the softest crunch of twigs under something careful. Your eyes dart toward the noise. Their movement in the brush, low, slinking, a wolf. It steps forward, slow and cautious. Gray fur, sharp eyes. It sniffs the air. Its ribs show slightly. This one's hungry. You don't breathe. Behind you, someone tightens their grip. Then another appears. 2 wolves, then 3. Your mouth goes dry. This wasn't supposed to be a pact on one of the older men, whispers a curse. The wolf in front turns its head sharply, eyes landing on your hiding spot. Your heart nearly stops. The lead wolf growls, low and guttural. Gerda acts first. She stands up slowly, not to scare it, but to show herself, tall, armed, alert. You follow suit, legs trembling. The others rise as well. For a moment, it's a standoff. Wolves versus humans. Instinct versus resolve. You realize you're outnumbered, outpaced, and probably outsmarted. But here's the thing. Wolves aren't stupid. They size you up. They see the weapons, the numbers, the lack of fear, or at least, the decent performance of bravery. The lead wolf growls once more, and backs away. One by one, the others follow. Silent as shadows, they vanish into the woods. You don't exhale until the forest does. The rest of the afternoon is spent tracking, just to be sure they're gone. You find paw prints, a flattened patch of grass, and even a gnawed bone that might have been deer or not. But the pack hasn't circled back. They know better. As evening rolls in, the group returns to the village, not triumphant, not cheering, just ... relieved. You didn't kill anything, and that's okay. The point was never glory. The point was survival. You sit by the fire later, half watching the flames dance, chewing on salted turnip, and wishing it was rabbit. Gerda sharpens her knife beside you. You did well, she says softly. You didn't panic, you shrugged. I panicked on the inside. She smirks. That's the better place to do it. Here's something quirky. In some regions, wolves were so feared they were assigned legal identities. You could actually take a wolf to court. Of course, it never showed up, but the paperwork was filed anyway. You stare into the fire, imagining a courtroom with a wolf in the defendant's chair, wearing a chainmail hood. You chuckle because, in the end, fear doesn't always have to win. Sometimes it just walks away, and lets you live to hunt another day. The morning after the wolf standoff, the village is unusually quiet. Not hushed from fear. There's a strange sense of pride hanging in the air. You helped stare down a pack of wild animals, and walk away intact. That doesn't happen every day, but you don't get long to bask. Gerda appears, with a look that says, no more speeches, just grab a shovel. Today's task, tracking scavengers, specifically, the 2-legged kind. You're going to the far edge of the woods where the law is a little fuzzier, and the food chain gets more ... creative. See, not every medieval hunt was about tracking fresh prey. Sometimes it was about finding the leftovers, the carcasses others missed or abandoned. Sometimes it was about reclaiming animals from poachers. And sometimes it meant doing something incredibly risky, raiding noble hunting grounds in the dead of night. But this time, you're looking for signs of a recent deer that was rumored to be wounded by a noble's arrow days ago, then lost. If it's still out there, it's limping, maybe dying, which means it's fair game. Kind of. Only if no one's watching. Gerda mutters. You head out with a small crew, and a few tools, knives, sacks, and a tattered scrap of old linen, that once served as a flag now, a bandage, in case someone gets mauled by a badger. Again, the forest feels different today, denser, quieter. You tread carefully, not because of wolves this time, but because the biggest threat isn't necessarily on four legs. It's the idea of being caught. Historians still argue whether commoners hunted illegally out of necessity or defiance. In truth, it was both. Forest laws were brutal. Entire swaths of land were claimed by nobles for their exclusive use. Killing a deer in one of those protected woods could get your hand chopped off, or worse, your entire hand, and a fine you'd never live long enough to pay. But when your children are hungry, and a stag is dying within reach, justice becomes negotiable. You find the trail after an hour-deep impressions in the mud, a few spatters of dark blood, and a tuft of fur snagged on a broken branch. Neil's wounded, not long ago, heading east. You follow silently. The forest narrows, the trees close in. Every twig snap sounds like a thunderclap. Then you smell it. Rot. The kind that sinks into your nose and stays there long after you leave. It leads you to a shallow ravine where flies buzz in a lazy halo. There it is, a deer, collapsed, ribs visible, eyes long gone. It didn't die cleanly. You can tell by the churned dirt, the broken branches, the claw marks. Something got to it. Before you did. Several somethings. Boars, Gerda says, pointing at the hoofprints. Or dogs. Could be both. Still, the carcass is mostly intact. Too rotten to roast. But good for stripping hide, and maybe rendering fat, if you're bold or desperate enough. And there are signs the heart and liver were taken. You exchange glances with the others, scavengers, and not the animal kind. You check the ground. Human prints. One large, one small, barefoot. Poor folk like you. Maybe poorer. Poachers, likely. Maybe from another village. Maybe just desperate strangers wandering between manors. It should bother you. It doesn't. You know that hunger doesn't. Respect boundaries. Here's a fringe fact. Some medieval communities encouraged poaching behind closed doors, so long as the meat was shared. It was a quiet rebellion. People breaking rules together, mouths full of guilt and venison. You gather what's usable. The hide gets cut clean, rolled tightly, and tied with rope. The bones are pulled for tools. Even the teeth are pocketed. You've seen children carve little charms from them, sometimes lucky, sometimes just creepy. And then you spot something strange near the tree line. A snare dot, old frayed, but still set. You kneel to examine it, nothing inside. Gerda crouches beside you. They're still around. You don't speak. The thought is unsettling. Not because of the danger, but because you recognize the work. The way the wire's twisted. The knot. Loop. You made traps like that, once. Maybe the person who set it was taught by someone like Gerda. Maybe they're just trying to survive, like you. Maybe they're watching you right now, hoping you don't take their next meal. You pack up and leave the rest of the carcass. There's nothing to gain by being greedy. That evening, back at the village, you share what you found. Someone trades a chunk of dried meat for part of the hide. Someone else gives you a handful of barley for the bones. No coins, just needs and trades and nods. You sit by the fire with a crude cup of warm beer, thinking. Hunting, in your world, isn't always about tracking prey. Sometimes, it's tracking people. Reading prints, noticing patterns, knowing when to press forward, and when to walk away. It's not always about the chase. Sometimes it's about the line you won't cross, even when you could. You stretch out on your mat under the stars, the sounds of evening drifting and the crackle of the fire. Someone snoring, a dog barking at nothing. Somewhere in the woods, someone else is doing the same thing, trying to eat, trying to live, trying not to get caught. And you understand them, more than you want to admit. You've walked the forests, you've set traps, you've stared down wolves, and tiptoed past the law. But now comes something stranger, something quieter, slipperier, and frankly speedier. Today, you're not chasing deer or baiting rabbits. You're going to the marsh. Why, eels. Yes, eels. Those long, boneless, vaguely accusatory creatures that look like a snake mated with a stick of butter. They are, shockingly, one of the most valuable food sources in your medieval life, especially during times when land game is scarce and you're too tired to fight for another. Squirrel Goethe gives you a long stick, a basket, and a smirk. Try not to fall in. The marsh lies a mile from the village's spongy, mud-choked expanse that squelches underfoot and smells like wet moss and forgotten sins. Dragonflies buzz lazily overhead. Frogs croak in a lazy rhythm. And beneath the water, invisible but definitely watching, are the eels now. Catching eels isn't about speed or brawn. It's about understanding how these slippery little monsters think. You don't bait a line or chase them with dogs. You trap them. The method is simple. You weave a funnel-shaped trap out of willow twigs, bait it with crushed fish or rotting meat, and place it in a channel or narrow current. The eels enter through the wide mouth, follow the smell, and then can't get back out. That's the theory. You slosh ankle-deep into the muck, carefully setting one of Goethe's eel pots into the water. It sinks with a satisfying plop. You secure it with a forked stick and mark the spot with a ribbon of cloth tied to a reed. Then you repeat the process, and again, until you've got 5 traps, bobbing gently, like tiny wooden coffins, for the worst type of fish. Here's a quirky tidbit. Eels were so important in some regions that people used them as currency. Rents were paid in eels. Debts settled. Entire documents exist detailing eel-based transactions. Historians still argue whether this was out of necessity, or because someone was really obsessed with them. You wade back to the dry edge of the marsh, socks soaked, dignity slightly damp. Now comes the waiting. Again. Always the waiting. You sit under a willow tree, watching the reeds sway in the wind. Bugs crawl on your sleeve. Somewhere, a bird makes a sound that could either be a mating call or an insult. Goethe hums to herself, sharpening a small knife, and occasionally glancing at the water, like it might explode. Finally, after what feels like forever, you check the first trap, and it's moving. You lift it slowly, water cascading off the sides. Inside, writhing and furious, is a thick, pale eel. It slaps against the wood, with wet determination, eyes tiny and judgmental. You resist the urge to drop it and scream. Barely. That's a fat one, Goethe says, grabbing the pot and appending it into a sack that immediately begins squirming like it's alive, because it is. Of course. The second and third traps yield more thinner ones, angry ones, and one so long it coils twice before fitting in the sack. The last pot is empty, but you're not upset. 3 eels in one afternoon. That's the medieval version of a jackpot. As you haul the sack over your shoulder, you feel a twinge of respect for these creatures. They're ancient, slippery, survivors, like you. By the time you reach the village, the sun's low, and the smell of eel is clinging to you like a second skin. The others cheer as you arrive. Mock cheers mostly. But you see the hunger in their eyes. Eel meat is oily and rich. It tastes like victory and pond water. You help prepare the stew, chopping leeks and scraping the slime from the skins. Goethe handles the slicing, her knife gliding through like it was made for it. You'd think eel would be a rare treat, but in this part of the world, it's surprisingly common. Rivers, ditches, and especially marshes are full of them if you know where and when to look. The pot bubbles, the smell, questionable. The taste, not bad, actually, a little chewy, a lot greasy, but it fills your stomach in a way that feels deeply satisfying, like your bones are finally nodding in agreement. You sit back by the fire, the last eel bones tossed aside, and sigh. Historians still debate whether eels were considered peasant food or delicacy since they showed up on both royal menus and mud-soaked peasant mats. Maybe it was both. The noble got the first pick. The peasant got what survived. Either way, everyone wanted a bite. You stretch your legs and let your head rest against a barrel. The stars are out again, winking down like they know all your secrets, and are too polite to laugh. Tomorrow, it might be rabbits again, or deer, or another night of laying out traps for birds you'll never catch. But tonight, you caught something weird and slimy. You made soup out of it, and you survived. That's more than enough. By now, your hands are calloused, your boots are permanently damp, and your nose is finely tuned to the scent of rotting bait. You've earned a kind of respect, grudging, quiet, and mostly expressed through fewer insults and slightly larger meal portions. But today, Gerda hands you something unexpected. A net. Not a snare, not a spear, a net. She doesn't explain, just jerks her head toward the woods and says, "We're going to catch birds. Big ones." You consider asking for clarification, but you already know better. Bird netting isn't like chasing a pheasant with a club. It's more like setting a stage for chaos, then hoping the actors follow their cues. You and 3 others march out to the far field and open space near the edge of the forest, where migratory birds like to land when the weather turns. This isn't a stealth operation. You're carrying poles, loops of rope, and a long, wide net that's been patched more times than your own shirt. The plan is to stretch it out in a V-shape between 2 trees. Weight the edges with rocks, and cover parts with loose straw and leaves the idea. Convince a few unfortunate geese or cranes to walk into it while you drive them from the far side. It sounds ridiculous. That's because it is. Here's a quirky fact. Medieval bird netting was so tricky and inconsistent that entire jobs existed just for this purpose. People would specialize in catching wildfowl with traps, nets, and even decoys carved from wood or sewn from cloth. Some used trained dogs, others, in truly ambitious moments, used trained crows to lure in rivals. Yes, crows. Nature's most sarcastic sidekick. You help set the net. It takes forever snagging on branches, tangling around your ankle, flopping over in the wind. Eventually, it stands. Barely. Then comes the hard part, driving the birds, which, of course, involves a lot of shouting, flailing, and clapping pieces of wood together. The others fan out in a wide arc, waving their arms, making noises that are meant to sound like predators, but mostly sound like drunk chickens. You join in, half-hearted at first, then with more energy as you see the first dark shapes in the sky. Geese. Big, mean, loud geese. They circle once, honking like they own the place, then begin to descend wings wide, feet outstretched, landing in the tall grass ahead. You move fast. The others keep flapping and shouting. The geese, irritated and confused, waddle straight toward the net. You hold your breath. The first hits the net and flails. Success. The second sees its buddy tangled and veers left. The third simply lifts off again and escapes. Still. 2 more follow the first, and now the net is alive with squawking, flapping wings, and feathers flying like someone exploded a pillow. You and another villager rush forward, grab the corners, and collapse the net inward, trapping the birds completely. It's chaotic. One pecks your arm. Another poops on your boot, but you've got them. 3 geese, big, feathery, hissing with fury. It's a triumph. Back at the village, the birds are dispatched, quickly, clean, and efficient. Thanks to a local man who insists he once cooked for a noble's banquet, though no one quite believes him. He plucks the feathers into a large basket, talking the entire time about gravy like it's a sacred ritual. Roast goose is no everyday meal. It's rich, fatty, and carries the smell of winter feasts and stolen holidays. The whole village shows up when the birds are cooking. Even the usually sour-faced tanner brings a jug of fermented cider that tastes like regret and apples. Here's the scholarly debate. Some claim large-scale bird netting was a coordinated, seasonal event across villages, almost like a communal festival. Others argue it was sporadic and desperate, done by whoever had the nerve and the net. Either way, tonight feels festive. You sit near the fire with a plate of meat, a bit of hard bread, and cider that burns on the way down. The goose. Skin crackles between your teeth. It's greasy, warm, and the closest thing to luxury you've tasted in months. You close your eyes for a second and think of the geese waddling through that net like they owned the world. Arrogant, loud, just like nobles. Really only easier to catch. Gerda slaps your shoulder. Didn't fall in the net this time, she says. That's progress. You smile, and for once it feels easy. The night winds down. Someone starts singing a song about a goose who married a fox. It makes no sense, but the melody is catchy. You sway gently to the rhythm, full and tired. You caught dinner again. You didn't die, and for once, you don't smell like eel. Progress, indeed. You're sore from yesterday's goose wrangling escapade. But it's a good kind of soreth, the kind that comes from food in your belly and laughter around the fire. Unfortunately, that feeling doesn't last. Today, it's back to the grind. Today, you're foraging, Gerta, ever the bearer of bad news. Hands you a woven basket and a small knife that's more rust than blade. No hunting, she says. Just finding, you sigh. This is the unglamorous, quiet work. No chasing, no netting, no dramatic standoffs with wildlife. Just combing the undergrowth for anything that won't kill you, or, ideally, anything that might fill you. Foraging in the medieval world wasn't a side hobby. It was survival. Mushrooms, berries, nuts, roots. Wild herbs, these things filled the gaps between the occasional rabbit and the even rarer roast goose. If you didn't know your plants, you starved. Or worse, you learned the difference between edible and hallucinogenic the hard way. You trudge into the woods, scanning the ground as Gerta lists off reminders. Red cap, white. Dots dead. Yellow stems with curled edges, diarrhea. Green spade leaves with hairy undersides. What tastes like boiled socks. Your first find is a patch of wild garlic. You crush a leaf between your fingers. It smells pungent and sharp. Into the basket it goes. Then a few fat chestnuts, tucked under a bramble. Then a jackpot, blackberries. Small, sour, and half-eaten by birds, but still better than dry bread and boiled weeds. You eat one immediately, regret it, spit the seeds into the wind. Gerta laughs. First harvests always for the birds. Here's something fringe. In some areas, peasants had to pay a fine just to forage in owned forests. Even mushrooms weren't truly free. Historians still argue whether these fines were strictly enforced, or just another threat nobles liked to wave around when bored. You push deeper into the trees. A clearing reveals a mess of dandelion ensius, the weeds. Gerta instructs you to take the roots. Good for tea, she says. Bad for teeth. She doesn't explain, and you don't ask. You pass a cluster of pale, waxy mushrooms that look like they're plotting something sinister. You don't touch them, then dash joy of joy, you find a patch of sorrel. Sour and leafy, it makes stew, slightly less miserable. Into the basket it goes. Here's the trick to foraging. It's not about what's tasty, it's about what's not toxic. Flavor is optional. Survival isn't. The hours pass in a blur of squinting at the ground and swatting. Away gnats. You nearly step on a snake. Gerta pokes it with a stick. It slithers off, probably just as annoyed as you are. You sit for a break, sipping lukewarm water from a goatskin pouch and chewing a piece of bark because there's nothing else. Birds sing lazily above. A breeze rustles the canopy. For a moment, you could almost call it peaceful. Then Gerta says, "Time to dig." You groan, she means roots. Wild parsnips, burdock, maybe some horseradish if you're lucky or unlucky, depending on your sinuses. You kneel in the dirt and start clawing at the soil, like a determined mole. You find two misshapen roots that might be edible. One stone, shaped like a potato you almost cried, and a worm the size of your thumb that Gerta insists is a decent snack if roasted. Hard pass. Eventually you gather enough greens, tubers, and maybe safe mushrooms to half-fill your basket. It's not glamorous, it's not impressive, but it's food. As you head back, Gerta reminds you of the rule. Never forage from the same patch 2 days in a row. You take too much, it won't come back. She says this with the reverence most people reserve for saints or weather omens. Back in the village, you help sort the haul. The garlic gets smashed into a paste. The roots are tossed into the pot. The berries, what's left of them, go into a communal bowl. Even the bark is steeped for tea, though it tastes like boiled fence. Dinner is strange but filling. A broth made from herbs, roots, and a questionable mushroom or two. It smells like feet. It tastes like dirt. You eat 2 bowls, because this is what it means to live close to the ground, to know every leaf, every bitter root, every stubborn stem that might just keep you from starving another day. Here's a fun tidbit. Monks in the Middle Ages kept illustrated. Herbals books filled with drawings of plants and their uses. But for villagers like you, the book is Goethe, her memory, her instincts, her warnings about that one that makes your ears ring. As the fire crackles, you lie back on your mat, stomach oddly content. Your fingernails are caked with dirt. Your knees ache, but you feel ... capable. Hunting doesn't always involve weapons. Sometimes it's a basket, a knife, and the ability to tell friend from foe when that foe has pedals. You wake to the sound of hooves. Not galloping, not panicked. Just steady measured hooves on the packed dirt road that winds past the village. That alone is enough to make everyone alert. In your world, a rider means news. Sometimes danger. Sometimes both. You peek through the thatch to see a figure in worn leather, leading a shaggy horse with saddlebags and a curved horn slung over one shoulder. Not a knight, not a lordsman, a courier maybe, or, as Goethe mutters, a beast. Your stomach tightens. These aren't just hunters, they're professionals. Specialists hired by nobles to track and kill specific creatures that become nuisances. Boars, wolves, bears, occasionally something worse. Their arrival always means something big is causing a problem somewhere. And now, the problem is near you. You're summoned before you finish chewing your stale crust. The headman explains with unnecessary drama. A wild boar has been sighted tearing up pastures just beyond the southern tree line. 2 goats have vanished. 1 fence was obliterated. No one slept in days. Guess whose turn it is? Here's your first reaction, panic. Here's your second, hunger, because a full-grown boar, if caught, would feed the entire village for weeks. The meat is rich. The fat renders down beautifully. The organs, if not cursed, are considered medicinal. Even the tusks make useful tools or terrifying jewelry. But wild boars aren't prey. They're battering rams with legs. They charge without warning. They gore, trample, and vanish into the underbrush, like ghosts with anger issues. Historians still argue whether medieval boars were truly as enormous and deadly as described in texts, or if the legends grew with the but you've seen the scars on Goethe's shoulder. You're not in the mood to debate. You set out with a larger group this time. Goethe, the beast hunter, 3 others, and you. Everyone carries something sharp, heavy, or both. No traps today. This is full-on tracking and confrontation. The woods are quieter than usual. Even the birds seem reluctant to chirp. You follow the trail, deep gouges, in tree bark, hoofprints wider than your hand, and a patch of torn grass still stained red. No bones, just blood. You grip your spear tighter. The beast hunter leads with an unnerving calm, moving through the underbrush like he was born in it. He points out. Sign scat, broken branches, a snapped sapling. The boar is circling, territorial, maybe wounded, maybe worse. Goethe catches your eye. If it charges, climb a tree. You nod, unless it's that tree. She points to a thin birch. That one's a liar. You wonder if she's joking. You choose not to find out. Eventually you hear it. Not a growl, not a squeal, just the low, rhythmic huff of something breathing behind a thick bramble wall. Then it bursts out. The boar is massive, black-bristled eyes wild. Its tusks curve like sickles, and there's a fresh scar across its flank. It's already bleeding, already angry, and now deeply offended by your presence. No one moves. Not for a second. Then it charges. The beast hunter sidesteps like he's made of wind. Another villager shouts and dives behind a tree. You freeze. Goethe doesn't. She plants her feet, spear low, and at the last second, thrusts upward. The spear hits. The boar screams. It doesn't stop. It knocks her back, crashes through the underbrush, and vanishes into the forest like it never existed. You rush to Goethe. She's bleeding, but laughing. Got the shoulder. Not dead. You breathe again. Tracking resumes. Now, more intense. You follow the trail of blood, the broken earth, the fur snagged on bark. The boar's injured badly. It won't get far. You find it an hour later. It's collapsed in a thicket, breathing ragged. Still alive. Still dangerous. The beast hunter ends it with a clean thrust behind the ear. Silence follows, no cheers. Number. Songs, just respect. This was a creature that fought, that survived until it couldn't, and now it will feed everyone. You help drag the carcass back. No easy feat. It takes hours. By the time you return, the sun's dipping low, and people rush out to see the prize. The children gape at the tusks. The elders nod solemnly. Someone whispers a prayer, just in case. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some medieval traditions, slaying a boar was considered a rite of passage into adulthood. They even had ceremonial boar feasts, complete with singing, carved boar heads, and enough ale to forget how terrifying the day was. Tonight, the village cooks everything: meat, fat, liver, even the heart. They stew it, roast it, wrap it in leaves and salt it for later. You're handed a bowl so heavy it bends the wooden spoon. The taste, unbelievable. Rich, smoky, primal. You eat until you feel drunk on food. The stars rise. The children fall asleep, in laps. The fire roars high, as if to honor the creature that almost killed you. You lie back, full, sore, and strangely content. You stared down a beast today, and you didn't blink. The morning after the boar hunt feels ... different, not quieter, exactly, but softer. There's a weight lifted, if only for a while. Full bellies tend to do that. The village breathes easier. Gerda limps around with her arm in a sling made from a goose feather stuffed sleeve. She claims she's fine. She always does. But today, she sends you out alone, not to hunt, not even to forage, but to observe. Because today's lesson isn't about chasing food. It's about watching how food moves. You're learning the ancient, tedious, deeply frustrating art of tracking. Not just following prints, but reading the land, reading it, figuring out who walked through a patch of grass and why, or which clump of droppings came from something edible, and which came from something that would definitely rather kill you than be a stew ingredient. Gerda points to the tree line and says, "Pick one animal. Follow it. Don't get eaten. That's it. That's the instruction." So you set out, alone, into the woods, damp with morning dew, and thick with buzzing flies. The air smells like mushrooms and old leaves. You kneel beside a trail and find your first clue: hoof prints, deer, probably small ones. Fresh, but not too fresh. You follow them, one step at a time. Here's the thing, tracking is slow, agonizingly slow. You move a few feet, pause, crouch, check the ground, sniff the air. Not because you know what you're doing, but because you want to. The hoofprints meander along a slope, disappear under some pine needles, then reappear near a stream. You find a tuft of fur caught on a thorn bush. You touch it, soft gray-brown. Deer, for sure. You smile, then lose the trail. Entirely you circle the clearing 3 times. Nothing. The tracks vanish like the animal decided to sprout wings. You kneel again, listen, wait. There across the stream, a faint imprint in the mud. You cross carefully, slipping once and soaking one boot. Standard, as you push forward, the forest shifts, the trees grow thicker, the air cools, and everything feels ... watchful. You find more signs. Scraped bark on a low tree, scat still steaming. You're close, and then, with no warning, it appears. A deer, not a giant stag, not some mythic forest guardian. Just a slim, delicate doe, nibbling at a patch of ferns. It hasn't noticed you, not yet. You freeze. You're not here to kill it, not today. This is about understanding, so you watch how it moves, how it pauses between bites, how it tilts its ears to listen before swallowing. You breathe slowly, in, out. You feel the earth, the silence, the heartbeat of the forest. Here's a fringe tidbit. Medieval hunters used to mimic animal calls, not just to lure prey, but to calm themselves. They'd hum like frogs, or coo like doves, not always effectively. One noble was famously kicked in the ribs by a stag because his deer call sounded like a dying goose. According to a bemused monk's record. You smile at the thought. Then the wind shifts, the deer stiffens, lifts its head, and bolts. gone in seconds. Just like that, you exhale for the first time in what feels like hours. You don't follow, you just sit on a mossy rock, listening to the rustling echo of its escape. There's something peaceful about this kind of hunt, one that ends in nothing. No catch, no blood, just knowledge. Quiet, a conversation with the land. Even if the land doesn't always reply, historians still argue whether peasants had the time or skill to track animals for sport or study, or if that was reserved for nobles, in their embroidered tunics and expensive boots. But you've learned that survival teaches its own discipline. Watching is part of hunting. Maybe the most important part. You wander back slowly, still half listening. You notice things you missed before. A crushed berry trail from a passing bird. A bent reed where something heavy knelt to drink. The scratch marks of a badger along the roots of an old elm. None of it is food. All of it is useful when you return. To the village, Goethe glances at your empty basket and nods anyway. You saw something. It's not a question. You nod back. A doe. Real close. Did you spook it? You hesitate. Maybe. Wind turned. Goethe shrugs. Happens. You sit down beside her, both of you staring into the fire pit, even though it hasn't been lit yet. The ashes are cold. The morning feels long, but you're learning. Not just how to hunt, but how to be, how to listen, notice, respect, how to walk through a world that doesn't owe you anything, and still offers everything if you're quiet enough to catch it. You lean back on your elbows, watching the clouds move. No arrows, no nets, just patience, and a growing understanding that not every hunt ends with meat. But every good hunter still comes home changed. By now you're more animal than villager. Your clothes smell like dirt and sweat and victory stew. Your boots have become more patch than leather. Your hands have memorized the weight of traps, the texture of feathers, the sharp edge of a toodle, knife, and your stomach, at long last, no longer groans with every sunrise. You've survived, but there's still one kind of hunt left, and it's the hardest kind of all. Winter's near. You can smell it in the mornings, now like wet stone and brittle leaves. The sun rises lower, the trees go bare, and all the animals you've spent months chasing, outwitting, and occasionally eating, they're vanishing. Hibernating, migrating, fleeing. Which leaves you with leftovers today. Your job is to find what everyone else missed. Bones, hides, antlers, feathers, the bits that aren't meat, but still matter, because in this world, nothing is wasted. You head out with a satchel, slung over your shoulder, empty now, but hopeful. No spear, no bow, just eyes, ears, and the kind of instinct that only comes from months of trying not to die. The first stop is the old deer trail near the western ridge. You remember it from weeks ago, thick brush, muddy banks, and that brief, glorious moment when you spotted your first real stag print. Now, it's quiet. You walk slowly, looking for glints of white against brown leaves, a shard of bone, a hollow rib, maybe a dropped antler if you're lucky, and then you see it. Not a skeleton, not exactly, just part of one, half buried beneath a tangle of roots, a deer skull, clean and pale, one antler still attached. You kneel beside it, brushing away dirt. With your fingers, it's heavy, beautiful in its own way. A reminder of something wild that once wasn't, now isn't. You tie it to your satchel. Later, you find feathers long gray, soft at the base. Goose or crane, maybe. Good for stuffing mats, or quills, or trade. Then come the hides. A fox's, left half buried near a creek bank, picked clean by scavengers. The fur still intact, mostly. You wrap it carefully, even though the smell makes your eyes watered. Back home, someone will clean it, stretch it, turn it into warmth. This is the rhythm now. Salvage, transform, survive. Here, single quotes, as a quirky fact. Medieval peasants used animal parts for everything. Bones became needles. Antlers turned into buttons. Letters held wine hooves, made glue. Even sinuous, the stringy muscle bits became thread for sewing. You didn't throw out the animal. You used it, all of it. You wander into a shallow cave. Not deep, just a rocky outcrop with a soft earth floor, and inside, a surprise. The dried remains of a boar, long gone, smells like thyme and rot. But the tusks are still there, curved, impressive. You take one, you don't know what you'll do with it yet. But something. Historians still argue whether this kind of gathering was organized work or just desperation disguised as tradition. Did people truly plan to find bones and feathers? Or did they just refuse to let death win more than it had to? Back in the village, you lay everything out. Antler, hide, feathers, tusk. Even the broken bits get claimed. Someone wants the rib bone for soup stock. Someone else asks for the skull to hang above their door. Keeps the bad weather out. They claim. You give them everything. You keep the tusk. As night falls, the wind grows colder. Gerta sits beside you by the fire, mending a torn blanket with sinew thread. She glances at the tusk in your lap. You earned that. You nod. Didn't even have to fight for it. That's the best kind of hunt. You both fall silent. The stars above are sharp and bright. The fire crackles softly. Someone hums a lullaby from across the square. You don't know the words, but it settles in your bones. You made it through the woods, through the traps, through the waiting and the cold and the long, hungry nights. You hunted, scavenged, watched, waited, and survived. And now, in the last warmth of autumn, you let yourself rest. Even wild beasts hibernate. Even hunters put down their spears. Even you, the fire burns low, glowing like a heartbeat in the darkness. Your body sinks deeper into your mat of straw and patched wool. The aches of the day settle, not in pain, but in quiet satisfaction. Around you, the village exhales. A dog curls beside a sleeping child. Embers drift upward like tiny stars. The night wraps around you, cool and slow and still. You think of the woods not as a place of fear now, but of rhythm, of breath and silence, of animals and people surviving side by side in different languages. You understand the language a little better now. A snapped twig, a cold wind, a streak of fur disappearing into the brush. It all makes more sense. You stretch your legs, the fire pops. Someone laughs in their sleep. Your fingers touch the tusk once, more cool, smooth, curved like a half moon. A trophy not of conquest, but of patience, of understanding the long, quiet story every creature tells as it moves across the land. Tomorrow, there might be frost. Tomorrow, the hunt changes again. But for tonight, everything is still. You close your eyes. Let the world fade. Let your breathing slow. You are a hunter, a gatherer, a watcher of trails, and for now, you rest. Because sleep is also a survival skill, and you've earned it.